Ever since you were a child, you've heard about let there be light. But have you ever wondered what existed before that? Before light? Before time? Before even angels? It's a question few dare ask, even fewer have the courage to try to answer. What inhabited the sky before any celestial creature was named? What vibrated in eternity before the first word was spoken? If you've ever felt that there's something hidden behind the traditional accounts, you're not alone. There is a silence in the Bible that speaks louder than many words. A silence between the verses, between the days of creation, between the lines of Genesis, and it is in this silence that the greatest mysteries of creation are hidden. Not those that were told to you from the pulpit or in Sunday school, but the hidden enigmas, those that have been silenced for centuries. Who, or what, occupied the heavenly throne even before the existence of the angelic armies? Could it be possible that there were even more ancient consciousnesses, forgotten beings, entities whose glory has been hidden from sacred history? What you are about to discover may surprise you. Some ancient texts speak of mysterious presences that had no defined form, that had no wings, but were closer to the source than any angel ever was. Eternal spirits, incarnate wisdom, manifestations of divine will that predate even the concept of creation. And perhaps you have already felt this somewhere inside you. Stay with me until the end, because what is about to be revealed has been considered dangerous by kings and forbidden by councils. They hid it out of fear. But the time has come to open that door, to revisit the primitive heavens, to understand what really inhabited the heavens above before the first star fell. And if the angels were not the first to inhabit heaven, who was? And if the angels were not the first to inhabit heaven, who was? Perhaps this question has awakened something in you, a memory not of this life, an old feeling, almost as if your soul has known this truth for a long time. Because sometimes it's not what we hear, but what we feel as we hear it, that reveals what was hidden. And if for some reason we don't yet understand, you were drawn to this very moment, to this very question. That too is part of the mystery. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you the most so far. It could be a question, a feeling, or just a thought that came to you while you were listening. Your voice is part of this journey, and when you share it, you help build this community of seekers, of people who don't accept ready-made answers but want to delve deep into the enigmas of creation. And if you haven't liked the video yet, do so now. Not out of vanity, but because each like shows the algorithm that this type of content needs to be seen by more people. People who, like you, feel that there is something beyond what is visible, and who deserve to have access to these revelations. And, of course, if you want to continue unraveling mysteries like this, if you want to be with me in the next episodes, where we will explore forgotten beings, forbidden books, and divine symbols that still vibrate in the invisible, subscribe to the channel now. That is what keeps this flame alive and allows more truths to come to light, because we're just getting started. And what comes next could completely change the way you understand heaven, beginnings, and yourself. Most people have never dared to ask because it is a frightening answer. Talking about who lived in heaven before the angels is not just a curiosity. It is touching on sacred ground. It's a territory that many consider forbidden, not because there are no clues, but because the answers can turn everything we have been taught as absolute truth upside down. How many times have you felt that the story of creation seemed incomplete, that there was something missing between the beginning and the light? This feeling is not an illusion, is the whisper of a hidden truth, muffled by time, traditions, and interests that go far beyond faith. For centuries, certain topics have been treated as heresy, questioning the celestial order, trying to understand what or who existed before the angels was seen as spiritual arrogance. But what if this impulse to seek, to question, is precisely what connects us to the divine in a more intimate and true way? The fear of asking questions does not arise from evil. It arises from the impact that the answer can cause. Because if we discover that heaven was not shaped just for angels, but for more ancient consciousnesses, we may have to reevaluate the entire spiritual structure in which we believe until today. Imagine a throne, not empty, but surrounded by nameless presences, beings that do not fit into the classifications of cherubim, seraphim, or archangels. Entities that do not obey dogma, but represent pure aspects of the divine mind. This is true occult theology, the kind that is not learned from textbooks, but that reveals itself in the intersection between the silence of the scriptures and the inner awakening of those who listen. Institutionalized. Religions have created a clear word claw. Religions have created a clear, linear, and secure narrative. But the universe has never been linear. It is made of layers, vibrations, and invisible decisions. What if before the creation of the heavenly armies there was a silent assembly of eternal consciousnesses? What if the wisdom mentioned in Proverbs is not just a metaphor, but a real entity that coexisted with the Creator himself before any word was spoken? The scriptures say, "The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his work." But what work? And for what purpose? When we free ourselves from the need to accept everything as we have been taught, we enter a territory where questions are more powerful than answers. This is where the true spiritual journey begins, not seeking certainties, but the willingness to cross the veil of official versions and delve into the backstage of creation. And in this place, time is not counted in days, but in revelations. Each idea you absorb here transforms your mindset, taking you away from the surface and closer to the essence. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there are clues scattered throughout ancient texts, forgotten records, and spiritual fragments that point to a surprising reality. Heaven, in its origins, was already inhabited, and not by angels, but by something more ancient, more enigmatic, closer to the source than anything we know. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we're going to explore next may change not only your perception of creation, but also your place within it. When we look at the first verses of Genesis, we see, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." But have you ever stopped to think that heavens, in the plural, came before the earth itself? This in itself is already an inversion of traditional logic. What's more, the text does not say that the heavens were created with angels. They appear before, much before. This reveals a subtle but highly significant detail. The heavenly environment was formed before any conscious creature was called into existence. Furthermore, when we read the book of Job, chapter 38, God asks Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" This is a powerful image. But notice, the so-called sons of God appear after the foundation of the world. This indicates that, during the creation of the heavens, these beings did not yet exist, or at least were not yet manifest. If the angels and morning stars sang when the earth was formed, then who or what witnessed the coming into being of the sky itself? There is, in this sacred interval, a silence that carries a cosmic cry of something that was already present before the light. And it is precisely in this interval that the deepest mysteries of creation reside. Ordinary theology prefers not to touch on this, because in this space, certainties disappear and questions arise that reason cannot address. But what if the heavens, when they were created, already had a consciousness? Not a creature, but a presence. Something like the echo of the Creator himself, spread across multiple spiritual dimensions. A manifestation of what the ancient mystics called primordial wisdom. In Proverbs 8, this entity called wisdom declares that it was with God in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. That is, before the creation of the world, before the waters, before the depths, before everything. And this wisdom does not speak as an abstract concept. It speaks as one who has an identity, as one who was a witness to a plan that precedes time. This is no ordinary allegory. For many scholars of the Hebrew tradition, wisdom was the first emanation of divine light, a type of consciousness that reflected the mind of the Creator without, yet having been transformed into a word, a silent witness to the formation of the invisible. The impact of this is devastating because it forces us to leave the mindset that everything began with angels or men. There is a reality that precedes any visible creation, a silent presence that has observed everything since the beginning, and that remains alive between the lines of the sacred texts. These forgotten fragments of Scripture are more than pieces of alternative theology. They are clues left for those willing to take an inner journey, a search for meaning that goes beyond the confines of religion and delves deep into the depths of the divine. It is no wonder that so many wise men throughout history have been persecuted for daring to suggest that there were beings or consciousnesses that existed before the angels. The very idea threatens the spiritual power structure that has dominated the world for millennia. But perhaps this is exactly the way to break with the surface, deconstruct the linear narrative, and allow new questions to reveal hidden truths. And in this process, there are no ready-made formulas. There is only an internal willingness to be transformed by what you discover. Because sometimes what is really scary is not the answer. It is the fact that deep down you already knew. Write it down. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because understanding what we have been told is as transformative as discovering what has been right before our eyes all along. There is a pattern that repeats itself throughout history. When a revelation threatens power structures, it is silenced, erased, reinterpreted, fragmented. And with the mysteries of creation, it was no different. The narrative that has come down to us, the best known, the most repeated, is not the whole truth. It is only the authorized part, the one that has passed through the filters of councils, dogmas, and the interests of those who decided what would be considered sacred and what should be forgotten. Not everything in the Bible is taught in churches, and not everything that has been considered heresy is, in fact, false. What many call apocryphal, others see as hidden treasure. There are ancient texts, such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Wisdom of Solomon, all of which contain fragments that not only complement what has been canonized, but that reveal a whole new layer of understanding, a layer that touches directly on this delicate issue: who inhabited heaven before the angels? These texts were banned not because they contradicted the sacred, but because they expanded the perception of it too much. And for many religious authorities, this was dangerous. A people who understand their deep origins, who know that they carry within themselves sparks of a presence that predates the visible creation itself, are a difficult people to control. It is easier to keep faith tied to rituals than to allow it to become a living, intimate, and personal journey. The truth is that many of these forbidden books speak of entities that preceded the angels, beings of light that have no known name, that do not belong to celestial hierarchies, but that participated in the creative essence in a direct way, not as servants, but as manifestations, as reflections of the divine spread throughout eternity before time was counted. And by hiding these records, what was lost was more than information. A bridge was lost. A bridge between the divine origin and human consciousness. But it can still be reconstructed. And that is what we are doing here, rescuing lost pieces of an ancient puzzle. Understanding who occupied heaven before the angels is not just a theological curiosity. It is a reconnection with what vibrates in our deepest spirit. It is about mentality. It is about awakening. Because when we realize that creation did not begin with the angels, But with something even more ancient and mysterious, we change the way we see ourselves. From passive pieces of a distant plan to conscious parts of an eternal purpose. This shift in perspective is what scares the systems, because it breaks the cycle of blind obedience and gives way to inner wisdom. And that is precisely why so. Many revelations have been kept from the reach of the majority, but now they are coming to light, one by one. And the impact of this can be irreversible, not in the destructive sense, but in the liberating sense. Once you see what is behind the veil, there is no going back. Consciousness expands, and with it, the understanding of our role in the cosmic order. This is the journey, and it requires courage, because looking behind the scenes of faith is also looking inside yourself, not with fear, but with truth, with the clarity of someone who knows that they are reclaiming something that has belonged to them since the beginning of time. Comment below. I am rediscovering my origin. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when we speak of eternal presences, we are not just dealing with ancient beings. We are coming into contact with intelligences that precede the very notion of time. Consciousnesses that did not arise, they always were, and that, for this very reason, escape any doctrinal structure. Before the heavenly armies, before the angelic hierarchies, before even the word creation existed, there was something that vibrated silently in the heart of heaven, like a living reminder of the absolute divine. The Bible, in its poetic and veiled language, suggests clues about these hidden entities. In Proverbs 8, wisdom is described as being with God at the beginning of his way before any work, before the depths, before the earth. But notice, she is not treated as an abstract quality. She speaks, she remembers, she feels, she testifies. I was with him as a master builder, and I was daily his delight. This is not a metaphor. It is the account of a conscious presence, of a living entity that actively participated in the mystery of origin. And this is not the only one. The 7 spirits of God mentioned in Isaiah, Zechariah, and Revelation also defy our traditional understanding. They are not angels. They are not created creatures. They are spiritual aspects, like fragments of a divine mind operating in multiple directions at once. They are pure manifestations, each carrying a primary function: wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, fear, and the Spirit of the Lord. These 7, together, seem to compose something that predates the very manifestation of the cosmos as. If they were invisible pillars supporting all that would come to be, these entities, by their nature, do not fit into known classifications. That is why they were forgotten. Not because they were not sacred, but because they did not fit into the molds defined by theologies constructed centuries later. In essence, what many traditions did was to replace spiritual vastness with comprehensible structures. They gave names to angels, functions to hierarchies, and rituals to faith. But in doing so, they left out presences that cannot be explained with words. Those who vibrated in the invisible, who existed before the Word. And it is precisely at this point that the journey changes. When we stop seeking answers within the walls of rational understanding and open ourselves to revelation, because this revelation does not come as an audible voice or a spectacular vision. It comes as an inner awakening, a remembrance that emerges from within, as if your soul, at some deep level, recognizes these beings, as if you have encountered them. Before, the impact of this is subtle but profound, because realizing that there were consciousnesses before the angels changes everything. It repositions creation, shifts the centrality of the human narrative, and forces us to look upward with new eyes, perhaps even inward. After all, if these eternal presences are part of the origin, what stops us from believing that traces of them still live within us? What echoes of this primordial wisdom still resonate in our deepest silences? That's where the transformation begins, when we understand that we are not searching for something outside of ourselves, but rediscovering something that has always been here. Something that was just sleeping, waiting for the right question to be asked, because some truths are only revealed to those who have the courage to listen to what no one else is asking. Write it down. I feel like I already knew this. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because some of the most revealing pieces of this puzzle are not in the pages we usually leaf through on Sundays. They are in forgotten texts, in manuscripts that survived the censorship of councils, the burning of libraries, and the silence imposed by religious institutions, books that were considered dangerous not because they contained lies, but because they touched on truths that challenged the entire structure of spiritual power built over the centuries. And among these texts, few are as enigmatic as the Book of Enoch. What we find in Enoch is not just another version of creation, but a dive behind the scenes of what preceded the physical world. There, we find descriptions of beings who existed before matter, before the earth, before the fallen angels themselves. They were not human, they were not demons, nor were they angels in the classical sense. They were eternal consciousnesses, entities of glory who witnessed the first movements of the Creator when the cosmos was still an idea in formation. Enoch speaks of the Watchers, beings who inhabited the highest heavens and who, contrary to what many imagine, are not just the angels who fell into rebellion. Some of these beings, according to the text, were already there since the beginnings. Silent witnesses of divine emanation as an active part of the spiritual architecture of the universe. And what is striking is that, unlike traditional accounts where creation begins with the earth, the sun, and living beings, here the focus is different. Everything begins in the invisible, in the divine decisions that precede any visible act. And those who were there before knew. This inversion changes everything. Because if there were conscious beings before the creation of matter, then the physical world is not the beginning, but a consequence, a projection. This means that the higher plane was not Matatoth angels. It was already in operation when the angels were formed. What's more, these earlier beings are not clearly named, as if their names were too sacred to be spoken or too dangerous to be known. Other apocryphal texts, such as the Book of the Secrets of Enoch or the writings of Baruch, also refer to these entities as beings of glory, eternal spirits, or conscious lights. They have no form, no gender, and do not obey any biological or angelic logic, but their presence is constant. They are the ones who receive divine instructions, who observe the foundation of the heavens, who witness the birth of time and space. And they are the ones who keep alive the original vibration of creation. It's the one that still resonates today in the deepest layers of the human soul. This idea forces us to make a radical change in our mindset. For centuries, we have been taught to believe that creation is linear, that it begins with nothingness, passes through light, then through angels, then through humans, until it reaches the final judgment. But what if it is cyclical? What if the starting point is not nothingness, but an invisible fullness, a heaven already inhabited by presences that still influence our reality today? What if part of our spiritual anguish is actually a forgotten call, an echo of these presences trying to remind us of something that our conscious memory cannot reach? This type of revelation is not meant to create conspiracy theories or religious fantasies. It is meant to liberate, to cause transformation, to reconnect us with deep aspects of our being that have been stifled by centuries of dogma. To know that there are beings who have not fallen simply because they were beyond the fall is to understand that there are levels of existence that have never been contaminated, that remain pure, in perfect harmony with the center of everything, and that perhaps, in some mysterious way, they still walk alongside us. Write it down. I feel the call of these presences. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because as we touch on the subtler layers of creation, we realize that traditional accounts were not constructed to provide answers, but to maintain boundaries. And when those boundaries begin to crumble, images and interpretations emerge that once seemed absurd and now make sense. Like, for example, the idea that the throne of God is not just a symbol of authority, but a living entity, a being that breathes the glory of the Almighty, that beats like a cosmic heart sustaining entire dimensions of existence. In prophetic visions, especially those of Ezekiel and John in Revelation, the throne never appears as an inert object. It is always surrounded by movement, by lights, by beings with multiple faces, intertwined wheels, eyes on all sides. This is not literary aesthetics. This is spiritual language trying to give form to something that transcends the physical world. Altogether, it is as if the prophets were trying to describe a celestial organism, not a chair, but a consciousness, a center of divine decision, alive and attentive, that not unlike sustains creation, but participator as the protagonist. And when we speak of the Spirit, the situation becomes even more intense. Because the Spirit, described at the beginning of Genesis as the one who hovered over the waters, appears even before the light. He is the first to move, the first to feel, the first to react to the primordial chaos. This cannot be ignored. The Spirit is not a passive force. He is the first inhabitant. He who contemplates the abysmal waters before any decree. And if he hovered, it is because he was already there, existed. He was not created. He was, and being before creation is, one of the marks of eternal presences. Some say that the Spirit is the Creator himself. Others say that it is his living extension. But there are also those who see it as the link between the inaccessible and the manifest, as if the Spirit were the breath that transforms the inexpressible into reality. This brings us to another delicate point. The Word, John writes that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But notice, was with and was at the same time, a double identity, a relational unity. This suggests more than a simple metaphor. It suggests an entity, the Word who, despite being God, possesses a mysterious individuality, capable of expressing himself, of being sent, of becoming flesh. This triad throne, Spirit, and Word forms a spiral of mystery. And if we look closely, we realize that these three do not air a scepter off creation. They are therefore. They are creation itself in its purest form. And perhaps that is why they are treated with such reverence in sacred texts, because they are not just divine attributes, they are presences, they are intelligences, living aspects of the original source, acting at levels that our logic can barely conceive. And it is precisely here that the most profound revelation begins to touch our own existence. Because if these presences were there before visible creation, if they are older than the angels, then everything that came after, including Ascaris, within itself echoes of these consciousnesses, perhaps not in their entirety, but as sparks, as seeds of a forgotten knowledge. That is why we sometimes feel something we cannot explain. That is why certain truths pass through us as if they were only dormant, waiting to be remembered. The symbolism behind all this is not spiritual decoration. It is a map. It's a map drawn in hidden, encrypted languages, often rejected by eyes trained only for the literal, but those who allow themselves to see beyond understand. They realize that heaven has never been an empty dwelling, nor a solitary throne waiting to be occupied. It has always been inhabited. It has always been consciousness. It has always been vibration. And perhaps it has always been a reflection of what also lives within us. Comment here. I feel like the throne is still alive now. I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when we say that heaven was not empty, we are not just evoking a poetic image. We are touching on a spiritual reality that has been intentionally veiled, distorted, or forgotten over the centuries. The idea that heaven was created, already inhabited by consciousnesses that predate the angels' shakes. The most fundamental structures of our perception of the divine. And the most curious thing is that, for many, this idea does not sound new. It resonates, vibrates like a memory that was merely dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The impact of this revelation goes far beyond a theological discussion. It reaches the depths of those who feel that there is something greater, older, more vast than any doctrine can encompass. Because if the angels were not the first to sing, then there was a previous song, a sound that perhaps still echoes behind the scenes of reality, at frequencies that can only be heard by those who silence the noise of official versions. A primordial sound that was not born from winged mouths, but from eternal presences, those that do not manifest themselves to the eyes, but awaken in the spirit. And that's why this question, but who then, is not just intellectual. It is existential. It is the beginning of a journey where you no longer seek answers outside, but begin to listen to what is already within. Perhaps this question has echoed from the beginning because, in some way that we do not yet understand, you were part of it. Perhaps the feeling of estrangement that so many feel in this world is, in fact, a longing for what precedes time. Call from the origin, a reminder that you did not start here. This kind of awareness demands a subtle yet profound transformation, because it asks you to let go of the need to understand everything with your mind, to allow certain truths to touch your soul directly. It asks you to walk among symbols, to perceive beyond words, to open yourself to a revelation that is not given to those who merely observe, but to those who commit toto feel. And if you've come this far, it's because something inside you has already responded, maybe without words, maybe with a shiver, a thick silence, a tear that appeared without explanation. But that ... is already an answer. It's the sign that, on some level, you recognize this hidden truth, that there is something inside you that is also prior, that also era. Comment here. I feel like there was something before. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized this frequency. And perhaps, among so many voices in the world, this was one of the few that spoke directly to your essence. So, if this type of journey makes sense to you, if it helps you see the invisible and feel what most people don't notice, subscribe to this channel. That way, you'll continue receiving content that isn't afraid to touch on what has always been sacred, but kept silent. Leave a like on this video, not only to support what was said here, but to signal that there is, indeed, an audience that values this depth. And comment below, I'm with you until the end, just so I know who really walked with me through each layer of this revelation. And if this content touched you, there's a video here to complement this dive. Click and continue with me there, because some truths don't come all at once. They reveal themselves in stages. And this journey is just beginning.